How can you know for sure that Jesus resurrected? As a former police detective, I know that when investigating a case, you have to examine the evidence, check with eyewitnesses, and rule out false leads. And when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus, there are plenty of theories. Some say he wasn't really dead. Others think someone stole the body. Maybe the disciples went to the wrong tomb, or the people who saw Jesus were just hallucinating. There are even wild ideas like Jesus had a twin brother and aliens took him. But what does the evidence actually show? In this episode of Be the 25 and the next one, we're putting these theories to the test just like a real investigation. What really happened on that first Easter morning? Well, stick around and let's examine the case so you can know for sure that Jesus resurrected and be able to explain why you believe it. It all starts in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Be the 25 podcast, the place where teens and young adults come to explore how to live the Christian life in a non-Christian world. I'm your host, Dr. Sharon O'Hara. Come join us and get your faith ready for the journey ahead. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Be the 25 podcast, the place where we help Christian teens and young adults keep growing and keep going in their faith journeys. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical questions of the Christian faith. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Most of us have been told all of our lives that he did. But is there a way to know for sure? Because here's the thing. Christianity stands or falls on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul put it plainly in 1 Corinthians 15, 17, and 19 that if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins, and we are, of all people, most to be pitied. In other words, if the resurrection never happened, Christianity is a complete waste of time. Now, some might say there's a 50% chance it happened and a 50% chance it did not. But when it comes to something this important, I don't want to guess. I want to be 100% sure. And that's when I go into police mode, and I am bringing you along. I spent most of my police career in criminal investigations, and a part of that, missing person cases. Hundreds of them. So I asked myself, if I was the detective on call on Easter morning, how would I investigate the case of Jesus being missing from the tomb? And that's exactly what we're doing today and next time. We're breaking down the evidence, examining the eyewitness accounts, and putting these resurrection theories to the test. So let's get to work. Now, eyewitness testimony is a powerful source of evidence. It's a person's account of what he or she observed, and it's used as evidence in a court of law. The gospel accounts, the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are eyewitness accounts. They were written by either an eyewitness or a close associate of an eyewitness who wrote down their account. The Gospel of Matthew was written by the disciple Matthew, who was a witness of the resurrected Jesus. The Gospel of Mark was written by Mark, who was not one of the original 12 disciples, but a close associate of Simon Peter, and he recorded Peter's eyewitness account. Luke, who was also not one of the original 12 disciples, but he was a close associate of the Apostle Paul, who was an eyewitness of the resurrected Jesus. In Luke 1, 1-4, Luke explains the reason why he wrote his book. He said, "Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They used the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. And the Gospel of John was written by the disciple John, who explains his purpose in writing in John 20, verse 31. These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, the gospel writers are consistent on all the major points that Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected. But there are differences in secondary details, and this is completely normal in eyewitness accounts. People notice and remember different details when witnessing the same event. For example, imagine you were a police officer at a traffic accident and interviewed 3 different people: a mechanic, a nurse, and a photographer. The mechanic would probably focus on the condition of the cars, maybe the damages, what may have gone wrong with the engine, or how the crash happened. The nurse would talk about any injuries and if medical care was needed. The photographer would be focused on the visual aspects of the scene, like how everything looked, what the lighting was like, or where things were positioned. Each person saw the same accident, but from a different perspective. And this is how police officers get a more complete picture of what actually happened. And that's exactly what happens with the 4 gospel accounts. The writers were reporting the same events, but highlighting different details, giving us a more complete picture of what actually happened. If all gospel writers gave identical word-for-word descriptions, it would suggest collusion or fabrication rather than authentic testimonies. So secondary details aren't contradictions. They actually complement each other and help us see a fuller picture of what happened. And you'll see exactly how that works in just a few minutes as we look at the written accounts. Now, there are many different explanations as to what happened to Jesus on Easter morning. The first theory is that Jesus wasn't really dead. This is known as the swoon theory. This suggests that Jesus wasn't dead at all. He just looked dead. He merely fainted, which is the meaning of the word swoon, while he was on the cross. The dampness of being in a tomb and the effects of the burial spices helped him make a full recovery. But to see if this theory holds up, we have to take a closer look at the injuries Jesus sustained and whether a full recovery was even possible. Jesus' injuries all began with a slap. After Jesus was arrested, he was taken to the home of Annas, the former high priest, and was questioned about his disciples and his teaching. John 18 records that a guard struck Jesus in the face, just because he didn't like how Jesus answered the former high priest. From there, he was sent to the home of the current high priest, Caiaphas, where religious leaders and guards abused him. Mark's account in Mark chapter 14 tells us some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, "Prophesy!" And the guards took him and beat him. After that, Jesus was taken to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who then sent Jesus to Herod. Luke 23 records how Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. But Pilate found no reason to charge Jesus, saying he has done nothing to deserve death. John 19:1 tells us, "Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged." Now, a flogging or scourging was the act of beating a person with a whip. The whip used for flogging in the first century had a short wooden handle at the end to which several leather thongs were attached. The tip of each thong had several sharp pieces of metal or bone designed to tear into the flesh. The victim would be tied to a post with arms over their head, feet dangling, and their bodies stretched out. A person would then be whipped across the back where muscles and veins were torn apart. Many would die of flogging before ever reaching their execution. According to Deuteronomy 25:3, Jewish law stated that no one could receive more than 40 lashes. Now, we don't know exactly how many lashes Jesus received, but we do know it was a brutal beating, which I'll explain why in a moment. Matthew 27 tells us, "Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around them. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head." The thorns that the soldiers pressed into Jesus' head may have come from a dwarf date palm or thorn palm, both common in Jerusalem at the time. Matthew 27 tells us the soldiers put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. It was customary for criminals on death row in the first century to carry the crossbeam that they would be nailed to all the way to the scene of the crucifixion. Jesus was no exception. John 19 tells us, "They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross." But Jesus couldn't carry it very far. Matthew's account in chapter 27 says, as they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. To me, this indicates just how weak Jesus was from the brutal flogging and the other beatings he had endured, which may also explain why he died after a relatively short time on the cross, something we'll look at in just a moment. We know Jesus was nailed to the cross because of doubting Thomas's statement in John 20:25. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand in his side where Jesus was speared, I will not believe it." Now, victims of a crucifixion generally didn't die until 2 or 3 days later. Jesus died after just 6 hours, which points to the weakened state of his body. Several people saw Jesus die. Mark 15:39 tells us, "And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, 'Surely this man was the Son of God.'" John, the only disciple present at the cross when Jesus died, writes in John 20, "Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. This step in piercing Jesus' side was taken to ensure Jesus was dead. The soldiers not only observed that he was dead, but also confirmed his death by spearing him in the side. Now, Mark 15 documents that after Jesus died, Joseph of Arimathea, a secret follower of Jesus, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. It says that Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. Pilate got confirmation that Jesus was dead before releasing the body. Now, Luke 23 tells us that Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus' body down and wrapped it in a linen cloth. And John 19 adds that Joseph was not alone. He was accompanied by Nicodemus. Now let's head to the tomb. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen. The body was wrapped and bandaged like strips of linen from armpits to feet, about a foot wide. These strips were covered with thick layers of sweet-smelling spices, often with a gummy consistency. This mixture served as both a preservative and as a cementing agent to solidify the wrappings. A separate cloth was also wound around Jesus' head. Matthew 27:60 records, "And they laid it in Joseph of Arimathea's new tomb, which they had hewn out of the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away." This tomb was carved into solid rock, a burial method often reserved for the wealthy. The entrance was sealed with a massive circular stone, typically weighing several tons. It was placed in a slanted groove, allowing it to roll into position by gravity when released. Little effort was needed to close it, but moving it open required the strength of several men due to its weight. Now, here are some investigative observations and questions I have. Is it reasonable to believe that Jesus, in a severely weakened state, could have freed himself of linen weighted down with pounds of spices? Would he have the strength to roll away a several-ton stone from the entrance of the tomb? Could he have survived 36 hours without food, water, warmth, or medical attention? And what about the centurion who confirmed Jesus' death? Would he have told Pilate that Jesus was dead if he were still alive? Would Pilate have released the body if there was any doubt? Would Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus have buried Jesus if they didn't think he was dead? They would have rendered first aid to him instead. If Jesus didn't die on the cross, then when did he die? And how did he die? If Jesus didn't die, then where was he when his disciples boldly preached his resurrection? If Jesus didn't die, why would the disciples and other believers risk persecution and even death if it all was a lie? If Jesus didn't die, why didn't anyone come forward with evidence to disprove his death? Here's the thing. When we examine all the gospel accounts put together, we begin to see a fuller picture of what really happened, giving us even more confidence in the truth of his death. Based on everything we've discussed so far, it's pretty clear that Jesus physically died. All the evidence points to that conclusion. Well, that's all we have time for today. Let me wrap up part one of this two-part series by sharing a few thoughts. Here's where it really hits home. Jesus died, but he didn't die just to be remembered. He died for you. Every ounce of his suffering, every moment on that cross was done with you in mind. So I have to ask, what are you doing with that? How are you letting his death change you? Because his death isn't just a story to read about in the Bible. It's an invitation to embrace his love and respond to the greatest sacrifice ever made by living differently. Think about it. If someone laid down their life for you, how would you live in response to that sacrifice? This challenges us to ask ourselves, what's my next step in following Jesus? So as you go through this week, think about how the reality of Jesus' death shapes the way you live your life. Are you living in light of that sacrifice, or have you let it fade into the background? Thanks for joining us today. In our next episode, we'll dive into the other theories that surround the resurrection, like the idea that someone stole the body, or maybe the disciples went to the wrong tomb, or were hallucinating. But it doesn't stop there. There are wild theories like Jesus having a twin brother, or aliens taking him? We'll put all these theories to the test next time on Be the 25.